All right, welcome to another episode of the Credder Podcast. I'm your host, Chase Palmieri, and with me today is Mike Elias, the founder of Ideamarket.io. And I was lucky enough to be on Mike's podcast last week, so we're returning the favor here. Mike, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great pleasure. Nice to see you again.
Yeah. So we focused, when we were talking on your podcast, we focused on Credder. So I'm excited today to focus on Ideamarket. Obviously, we're working in a somewhat related space. The word credibility comes up often in your product and your copywriting. And of course, same with us at Credder. So let's start with you, just kind of the elevator pitch of what is Ideamarket in your own words.
Sure. The elevator pitch is, in the same way that Bitcoin is money without banks, Ideamarket is credibility without institutions. We're very frustrated with the huge gap between the world's best knowledge and the knowledge that gets called official and turned into common knowledge. And we have the technology now that we don't need to rely on these companies and corporations, but they still control this notion of credibility. So we're building alternate rails for the public to decide what deserves its trust and to manage its own knowledge that way.
Okay, and you brought up the word trust, and a lot of probably what we're going to spend some time on today is the distinction between trust, credibility, truth, facts, opinion, and these things tend to get a little messy when you really zoom in. But if you can break down this concept again, Ideamarket is solving for credibility without media institutions because you're doing it in a decentralized, crowdsourced way. Can you explain a little bit about how that practically looks for users?
Yeah, totally. We're building on Arbitrum and Ethereum layer 2. And yes, we've been wanting to create, some kind of, the name of our company is Ideamarket. And we were initially inspired by Reddit, the way that Reddit was enabling people to take something that was very obscure and overnight turn it into global knowledge. In my opinion, this is what the internet is for. I just loved the power of that. The problem is Reddit is a privately controlled company that can easily moderate and manipulate things. There's no real defense against state actors manipulating upvotes that are free. So we wanted to use the special features of blockchain and crypto technology to make it more expensive to manipulate the results of something like Reddit. Our initial approach to this took the form of literal markets, kind of like a stock market, but that turned out to be more complicated and hard to do than we initially planned. So the product that we're launching in about a week, it's late August, so yeah, very, very soon, is like a social network that is a knowledge graph on the side. And the term knowledge graph might be familiar to people who are fans of like Roam Research and various note-taking apps and things like that. But it basically works like Twitter. You make a short post on chain, and then you can rate your agreement with that post on a scale of 1 to 100. And anyone can rate any post. So for every little sentiment, every little proposition posted on Ideamarket, everyone can show their agreement. And it creates sort of like a credibility petition, where if you have a statement like Epstein didn't kill himself, you don't need the New York Times to agree with you. If you have 100 people that you trust all in a list saying, yeah, I'm 97% sure that this is true. So kind of in the same way that Substack has been taking journalism out of institutions and giving it to individuals, we're doing that with credibility, because we think it's not long before the opinions of 100 people you trust outweigh the opinion of one institution you don't trust.
Right. And so you're inherently using crowdsourcing to do this. We obviously do that at Credder as well. So maybe we'll dive in next into the pros and cons of crowdsourcing, because this is something that comes up, this kind of concept of a popularity contest as a key concern that people push back against. But first, you say credibility again, and you use the the example of Epstein didn't kill himself. In some ways, that could be a fact, a factual statement, falsifiable statement. But in some ways, it's also a narrative that maybe the mainstream media takes the opposite narrative, whereas it seems like on this particular issue, which is why it's a great example. It seems like average news consumers, think that there was foul play, whereas the mainstream media seems to be towing a line that kind of the official narrative. So how much of this 1 to 100 scale is about confirming what the user thinks is a true fact or statement versus kind of their take on a narrative? And
Yeah.
is there a distinction?
Yeah, I think the distinction is fuzzy enough to blur out altogether, in the sense that the statements that we regard as facts are kind of decided to be fact by a panel of experts, by professionals, by journalists, by institutions, but it all comes down to being someone's decision what kind of promotes an opinion into a fact, or promotes a conclusion into a fact. Because what we consider to be facts change all the time. They're obviously not permanent or set in stone. Human beings quite clearly don't have the ability to know things with such certainty that we can just declare them to be true in any kind of permanent and credible way. So instead of trying to find or establish certainty, we're reestablishing credibility on the basis of personal opinion, which is where it's always been. Even facts just come down to some group of experts' opinion. And maybe they deserve to be the ones who decide what's a fact and what's not. But the public has never been allowed to decide who decides what a fact is. And that's what Ideamarket is enabling people to do. It's creating this public track record of personal judgments so that everyone can see whose judgments have been insightful in the past and whose have been misleading. Does that clarify a little bit?
Yeah, well, let me dive a little deeper there then. It sounds to me like you're saying truth exists in its raw form, but that we as humans, what we consider facts is our most up-to-date current interpretation of a truth, whether that is later verified by whether we want to call it science or investigation and research. But sometimes what we think of as facts end up being disproven later on, and new facts emerge, or the facts have to change to fit new breakthroughs in understanding. So I guess, would you say that truth is real and omnipresent, but facts are our current interpretation of certain truths?
Very similar. I would absolutely say that truth is an existent thing, and omnipresent, and incredibly important, obviously, or we wouldn't be here right now. But facts are kind of a linguistic convention. They're kind of a shortcut that underneath it implies, I've decided to be certain enough about this not to question it anymore. And that's a judgment. That's an emotion, like I feel this level of certainty, or it's a judgment, like the statistics are such that it's worth setting aside further questioning. And there's no escaping the fact that someone must make that judgment. And have they made good judgments in the past? Do you trust their judgment? Do you have a different judgment? The idea of facts gives knowledge a sense of certainty that it basically never deserves. And so we want to reestablish knowledge back in the realm of uncertainty and opinion, where it inevitably is, and start measuring things from that angle instead of pretending that there's someone out there who can decide for us.
Okay, and so would you maybe say that the declaration that something is a fact is in some ways unscientific, because science is about continuing the process of questioning and testing what we believe to be true, and it's kind of a never-ending thing, whereas facts seem, like you said, kind of permanent, fixed, and the work is done, let's move on?
Absolutely. When Yeah, I would say the concept of facts implies a level of certainty that's never justified, especially in science, where the deeper you go into any field, be it physics or math or philosophy, you find less and less justification for certainty. You have Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in physics, you have Gödel's incompleteness theorem in math, you have Wittgenstein's language games in philosophy. The harder you try to find certainty, the more impossible it gets. The closer, it's almost like you arrive at an asymptote or something where thou shalt not become more certain than this. We're just not built for it.
Yeah. Okay. And so on your white paper, you have the quote, facts always require trust in a third party. And so I guess the difference here with Ideamarket is that to some degree, you're still trusting a third party, but it's not a singular third party. It is the aggregate kind of information that the market as a whole has to offer on that particular fact. And I guess, can you touch on why it is better to have trust in a decentralized third party, and then also maybe just the value of the concept of a market, which is kind of this constant process of everyone having an incentive to try to find the right answer, and it's an evolving thing?
Yeah. First, I should clarify that our goal is not to be a decentralized third party that people trust, but to enable people to directly record their opinions in a way that can be easily aggregated and filtered and sorted through and displayed in various ways. And we enable that. And we're making suggestions about like how to collect all the ratings into a summary that's a particular number. But there's no guarantee that that's the best way to do that at all, and I'm sure that many others will emerge. So you're asking what is the advantage of trusting a decentralized third party, and I think it's that when there is a sort of official narrative cabal, an official narrative set of institutions that are working together to keep public knowledge in a certain place, or keep the Overton window in a certain place, keep the conversation in a certain place. There's a certain dishonesty in that is not shared by the general public. The general public is trying to answer questions like, how will I feed my family? Should I get this vaccine or not? Is there a recession or not? Are we going to war or not? The people are concerned with the things that affect their everyday lives and need honest answers. Their lives literally depend on it. And so when a centralized group of institutions want to control a narrative, they can prolong its evolution and its iteration for a lot longer than a more honest group of inquirers would tolerate. People often, worry that on a decentralized credibility aggregator like Ideamarket, conspiracy theorists will just take over and then crazy things will be out there. Or, the question like, aren't conspiracy theorists wrong all the time? Like, the few times that they're right, does that really outweigh all the times that they're wrong? And I think that's the wrong place to draw the distinction, because as we've all noticed, the official narrative institutions are wrong a lot also. The difference is that conspiracy theorists and people in general iterate a lot faster. When they're wrong, they're not wrong for years and years and decades in the face of the resistance of the public. They are the public. They're interested in their interests. And when new information arises, they change their beliefs a lot faster than the New York Times will or the WHO will or anything like that. Does that clarify somewhat?
Yeah, it does. And I think when it comes to finance, and it's, again, interesting that you started this concept as more of kind of that typical stock ticker market look. We often hear the term, the market will decide. basically saying that the market intelligence might take a while for a price to be discovered or the value of something to be understood. But, the best intelligence that we have in finance is by letting the market decide. And the market is what the market is. You can say it's right or wrong at any given time, but the market is almost this, it's aggregating the thoughts and ideas and intelligence of all participants to the benefit of a singular metric, for example. And so it seems like what Ideamarket is trying to do is let the market decide, but in a new category, in the category of statements, facts, knowledge. Is this something that you think could be applied or will now, because of crypto and the rising movement around decentralization, that this concept of letting the market decide will expand into other industries and concepts that we previously only relied on centralized kind of authorities on?
I think when it comes to knowledge, the market metaphor has a lot of extraordinary advantages over the facts metaphor. The reason is, when we look for facts about a situation, when a crisis happens and we're going, what's going on? What are the facts about the situation? We look for authorities. And we say, what do the authorities say? And this, this trust in authorities gives those authorities a lot of power over us. And we can offload our responsibility onto the authority and say, it doesn't matter, if I'm wrong, it wasn't my fault because the authority said it. Who am I? How am I wrong for believing what the authority says? So it kind of takes away a lot of the inherent intellectual responsibility of the individual. By contrast, when we are looking for investments in a market, we're not looking for authority. We're looking for value. Specifically, we're looking for things that are undervalued. We're looking around to see what are the possibilities here that might emerge or that are not getting adequate attention or not getting sufficient attention. What are people not paying attention to that they should be? And this causes markets to iterate very quickly in the recognition of value. And when this is applied to knowledge, it means that the underrated knowledge will be recognized more quickly and gain the attention that it deserves more quickly and automatically, without any centralized party having to manage all of that or resist any of that.
Right.
And that metaphor of looking for value in knowledge and adjusting in that risk management sort of way, without anyone having to understand that's what's going on, just having that operate in the background, having that be the background assumption, I think will yield much better and faster results in the knowledge space than we have now.
Yeah, because to a certain degree, there's a real, tangible financial incentive to do what you just said, which is identify something that is undervalued currently by the market. So, as humans, we're very much driven by our financial incentives. And so I think that ties into kind of the next question I wanted to ask you, which is something like Ideamarket, was a crypto, angle to it necessary to achieve Ideamarket because there needs to be some kind of staking and financial incentive component to it, or could it also be done without a crypto component?
I suppose in theory it could be done in a centralized way, but that makes it vulnerable to a lot of the same manipulations that every other centralized knowledge authority or market authority has always been subject to.
Okay. Then tell me the power of staking as a component, this concept of having skin in the game, and how that makes the process better, different.
Sure. So right now, we're kind of giving Ideamarket a fresh start and keeping the financial risk as close to zero as possible. So staking right now doesn't involve any risk of loss. What staking ends up being now is almost like voting or electing users that you trust to have the greatest opinion, greatest influence over the confidence rating on Ideamarket. So if I have 10,000 IMO, that's our token IMO, like in my opinion. If I have 10,000 IMO staked on my account and I rate a post, my rating will have a greater influence on the overall rating of that post than someone who doesn't have any IMO staked on them, or something that has 2,000 IMO staked on them, or something like that. So it acts as a sort of, the crypto term for it is delegated proof of stake, but it's really kind of like a perpetual election of representatives that express your view and put it forward into the posts. And there's nothing stopping you from putting IMO on yourself and doing it that way too. But the main benefit of this is it makes it very expensive to significantly manipulate the results of the market.
Okay. And in traditional businesses, corporations, a key metric, perhaps the guiding metric, whether CEOs of companies want to admit it or not, is the price of their stock. Because to a certain degree, the success of the business will ultimately become visible in the price of the stock, and the price of the stock allows them to, raise cheap capital, incentivize employees, get earned media, all of these kinds of incentives that come from showing an upward to the right trajectory in stock price. Is it the case that to some degree, you guys want the value of the IMO tokens to go up in value, or because it's a utility token, it's completely irrelevant? How much do you as the founder think about that?
The overarching point of crypto tokens and protocols like Ideamarket tends to be for governance management of the protocol by its users, by its community. And those kinds of features are, the main focus of IMO. Like I mentioned, right now, it currently serves a delegated proof of stake function for information curation, which doesn't exist in any other protocol as far as I'm aware. So IMO will be intimately tied to the platform's unique abilities, but also it's designed to be used to let the community manage it so that I don't have to, be the one in charge. So people don't have to trust me to do a good job, that people can kind of self-organize around the principles that allow Ideamarket to work. And as it matures, use IMO to manage the direction of the platform as the world changes around us.
Okay, and I understand that you began with Ethereum and then had to switch platforms because of high transaction costs. Is that right?
Yeah, so Arbitrum, the network that we're on now, is a layer 2 of Ethereum. But yes, when we first launched in February 2021, it was right when Ethereum was starting to get impacted by a lot of use. So the transaction fees at the time were between $50 and $200 per transaction. It was just outrageous.
Yeah.
And given the unsustainability of that, it was an industry-wide problem. And so we waited for layer 2 solutions like Arbitrum and Optimism to emerge. And our CTO at the time had won some of the largest bug bounties in Ethereum history. So I trusted his judgment very much in terms of which layer 2 we migrate to. And he went deep into Optimism. We almost launched on Optimism, but then they postponed their launch, a bunch of months. So then we checked out Arbitrum, and he ended up liking Arbitrum a lot more. And so, we still run on basically Ethereum style rails. It's just on the layer 2 above it.
Okay, cool. And going back to this example of Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. Or sorry, let's say that the statement is Jeffrey Epstein did kill himself. And let's say that Ideamarket users give that a rating of 90. There's a confidence level of 90 that the community is saying, no, in fact, Jeffrey Epstein did kill himself. What do other individuals, or what do you as the company do with that score? I understand that you have some partnerships either upcoming or underway with minds.com and mask.io. How does it look to kind of push that score into more places so it can be more relevant, more useful, or add context in other, digital experiences? What happens with that score once you have it?
Sure. So the first thing that happens is we can build prediction markets that are based on public opinion instead of some instrument measuring something somewhere, or a set of oracles, or a court, or a media corporation. For example, Metaculus is kind of a prediction market style website that people like to use to make guesses about things and predictions and forecasts. And with a lot of the most important topics that require some measure of subjective judgment, they are settled by, well, when 4 of these media corporations agree that X is true, then the market will settle. The problem with that is then it becomes implicitly not so much a bet about the information, but a bet about what these media corporations will consent to admit. So Ideamarket enables prediction markets based on public opinion that are not so dependent on the ulterior motives of media corporations and other authorities.
Okay. If I were to kind of play devil's advocate, or maybe you can kind of steelman this, wouldn't they be substituting as the determining factor these 4 media institutions for just what the general public believes to be true, but maybe neither is necessarily accurate?
Yeah, sure. The challenge is if they settle the market with what the general public believes to be true, what would they use to kind of certify or measure that? There are polling companies, there are social media companies, there are media corporations, there are institutions of public whatever that monitor things and poll people and whatnot. But all of these are tend to be subject to the institutional narrative demands, the kind of obedience demands that might not apply to the public when the public is directly influencing a thing. And so it requires a certain measure of maturity and ideological diversity to work properly in this respect. But Ideamarket at least provides like a new sort of scientific measurement of public belief that doesn't have any interpretation layer in the middle that is outsourced to a group of experts or something like that.
Okay, gotcha. And so these prediction markets, is this a potential revenue model for Ideamarket, or is revenue models kind of irrelevant once you're a token kind of crypto business? It's just about maybe somehow getting them to use the IMO token as part of their their integrated prediction market. How does it work? How does Ideamarket make money today, intend to make money, or is making money irrelevant?
Sure, no, it's very relevant because a protocol can still build up a treasury of funds that it can use to create partnerships or market itself, or pay developers to build new things, or pay fans to build new things, pay random people to build new things. So it's very useful to have a treasury to continue operations regardless of the token price. So revenue, yes, is important. And the way Ideamarket makes money now is, well, actually next week when we launch this, is I mentioned the sort of social network aspect. You make a post, people rate posts. What I didn't mention is that every post that you make costs 1,000th of an ETH, and that's a posting fee that gets paid to Ideamarket. So for every 1,000 posts, our treasury gets an ETH. And the reason that people might pay that fee, which is about $2, it's about the size of a gas fee anyway. It's pretty negligible in terms of crypto fees. The reason people might be happy to pay that is because for every rating that you receive on a post that you made, you get 1,000th of an ETH. So if you make a post and only 3 or 4 people rate it, you're already in the green. And if you post something that's very relevant, or if you share it with a big audience and a lot of people rate it, then you could make hundreds or thousands of dollars in theory, denominated in ETH.
And so the ETH that is paid out to the person that posts, is that coming out of your pocket, or are the people who are voting on the posts also staking, whatever amount of ETH you just said?
Yeah, the people who are voting on the posts, the people who are rating the posts, pay 1,000th of an ETH for each rating, and they pay it to the person who owns the post that they're rating. Yeah.
And so explain to me kind of the incentive of why it's almost in a way like the opposite, or maybe there's an incentive model that I'm not seeing here and you'll explain, but it almost seems like the opposite of what you'd want to do to get engagement and contributions, because you're saying instead of us paying you to contribute to these ratings, you're going to pay the person who posted the question to rate it.
Yeah,
So what's the incentive for the rater, I guess?
sure. That's a great question. I'm glad we're going to talk about these things all right in a row. The incentive for the rater is when you are rating something on chain, what you're basically doing is creating a public database of your personal beliefs. If I'm 75% sure Epstein didn't kill himself and 95% sure the COVID vaccine isn't working very well, and 12% sure Joe Biden is a hologram, and like whatever your niche weird beliefs are, this is all being put on chain, and it's creating basically an open source public database. And what we can do with that is, for one, we can introduce people to each other. There's a place in the Ideamarket user profile to include your Twitter account. And so we can create an algorithm that matches people based on how much they agree with one another. And so if I'll visit my profile and see a list of these are the top 50 people in terms of closeness of agreement with you, and here's all their Twitter accounts. So it helps people find each other and find each other's work. You can promote your Substack, your YouTube, your Etsy, whatever, to specifically the people who are the most like you. So the social like tribe finding, slice and dicing of this data that accrues as people rate things is a kind of pretty unprecedented level of precision in terms of audience discovery and connecting with people who are similar. There's one other angle from this that I want to mention before hearing your questions, which would probably be many. But there's a frequent behavior in crypto called airdrops, where projects, especially projects that are just starting out, will give away some of their token for free to people who might be interested in their project and contribute to it later. And the hard part about doing airdrops is if you airdrop tokens to people who don't actually believe in your product, they'll just sell the token right away and cash out and crash the price of your token. So it's very important for airdrop protocols to choose the right audiences who will end up actually believing the protocol and not sell these free tokens that they're being given because they expect them to increase in value or because they're going to participate in the network themselves. And what Ideamarket allows airdrop protocols to do is filter their audiences by their personal beliefs of the audiences, because this is all on-chain data that can be filtered down. So if I'm starting a new crypto project and I want to airdrop 1 million tokens to 25,000 people, I can find the 25,000 wallets that are most closely aligned with the philosophy of our protocol, and also have whatever other on-chain attributes that I decide. So the more posts you rate on Ideamarket, the more airdrops you're likely to be chosen for. So there is kind of a potential of getting free money out of having spent a few dollars rating posts on Ideamarket.
Okay. And one of the things that has kept Credder from going down this path of having our own token and kind of baking in all of these really interesting and valuable financial incentives for the contributors is a little bit of the fear around compliance and whether or not these tokens are going to be deemed securities down the road, and whether something like airdropping what might later be considered unregistered securities could derail the business or create a bunch of legal headaches down the road. I'm curious how much you guys think about this or feel like, no, we're actually pretty clear on the guidelines we're covered, or do you feel like you need a strong legal and compliance team to be able to operate a business in crypto today that's dealing with tokens? How do you think about the kind of compliance and legal issues that might be coming down the road?
Sure. When we first started, we hired one of the best lawyers in crypto, and he's still well known. And he set us up really well at the outset. He gave us a really thoughtful terms and conditions, and helped us understand exactly what was permitted and what was not, and what was advised and what was not. And as the regulatory landscape changes, there's still very little clarity for crypto. There's still a lot of heinous behavior that is not being addressed by the regulatory bodies. And our main approach right now is, to avoid going into the areas that are obviously blacklisted, that have had actions brought against them and things like that. And at the same time, also to keep financial risk at a minimum. And in our product, that's absolutely achieved. We've audited all our smart contracts, so the technical risk is minimal. And there's no kind of financial risk built into the protocol itself. People are paying $2 or $3 in fees at a time, perhaps, and possibly earning money. But there's no way to use Ideamarket that could result in you losing hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. And that's the kind of thing that makes people mad and inspires class action lawsuits. So we're far from the kind of behaviors and structures that seem to call down regulatory thunder in our industry so far.
Okay. And we know that Ethereum is going to be pushing out what they call kind of ETH 2.0 here. Hopefully by the end of the year, or at least that's what we're hearing from the foundation. I know that Ideamarket clearly believes in staking to some degree. Do you have any personal opinions on the value of, or the difference between proof of work and proof of stake algorithms?
Yeah, actually, I'm somewhat skeptical of proof of stake, especially for Ethereum for a few reasons. But I'm a non-technical founder, and even if I were technical, I would not be of the intellectual capacity to be solving Ethereum's problems on that level. So I'm perfectly happy to sit on the sidelines of that conversation and criticize it. It seems like proof of stake is likely to reduce gas fees significantly based on word on the street, and that would be great for everybody. But proof of work has a special kind of beautiful touch to it, and that is, with proof of work, the punishment comes first. You put up the investment, you lose the money, and then if you don't behave, you lose the chance to recoup it. Whereas with proof of stake, you have all your money, and if you behave, then you get slashed. The punishment comes later. And I think that distinction could prove important in the sense that when, proof of stake seems dangerously close to the current kind of form of rent seeking, where, you occupy some valuable asset for forever, and then the value of it increases just out of the sheer necessity of it, and nobody can unseat you. You have unlimited power, and it seems less anti-fragile than proof of work. And I'm also kind of critical of the argument that proof of work uses too much energy or something like that. Again, we can talk more about that later, but as a non-expert and as someone who kind of pathologically likes to contradict the prevailing belief on things, I have some skepticism about proof of stake, but it matters not at all. It's going ahead no matter what I think, and I'm probably going to benefit from it and have no complaints in a couple of months. But I'm concerned that there may be some inherent superiority in proof of work that the industry is overlooking for the moment.
Yeah, and I'll kind of add to that I'm also not that technical, but it's obviously something you and I both are following. I also have my skepticism of proof of stake. I do believe that it will lower transaction fees, and I think that that's a huge incentive for Ethereum to want to make this change, and perhaps a blind side because they feel like, or a blind spot, sorry, because they feel like, well, this is necessary for Ethereum to thrive, and it's only possible with proof of stake. Therefore, we have to come up with the justification for why proof of stake is better or more secure than proof of work, because it's kind of fundamental to the success of Ethereum long term, and to make sure more people don't move off chain or to layer 2 or elsewhere to Solana and a lot of the emerging competitors. But let's dive just a little deeper on what you said, because I have some strong opinions on it as well. Is the idea that proof of work is not this environment destroying thing that Ideamarket would hopefully eventually disprove that narrative. The thing about proof of work is it's energy for energy, and it rewards the most sustainable form of energy. I believe personally that it is creating, and again, it all comes down to financial incentives. I think it is creating the first real financial incentive for sustainable green energy production, because you're now saying, no matter where you are in the world, if you create a renewable, reliable form of sustainable energy production, you can now monetize it. And it now creates the automatic justification for investments in things like hydropower, hydroelectric, and others. So is that kind of your take as well? Or is it just more that, this is still a microscopic percentage of the energy usage, and energy used is always gonna, we're always gonna use energy, and I can't think of a better way for us to spend energy than to create a secure global monetary policy? Is it a combination of those two, or is there something else to it?
I definitely agree that proof of work incentivizes innovation in energy and competition to create less expensive energy, because that is, as you pointed out, the energy that goes into proof of work. It's not coming from houses in New York City. It's coming from generators in Montana and Mongolia that wouldn't be used otherwise. So I agree in general with the idea that Bitcoin and proof of work is better for energy innovation than proof of stake. But more than that, or another factor is that energy expenditure itself, in and of itself, is not such a terrible thing. The question you have to ask is, what is it? What is the alternative to spending this energy? For example, in Bitcoin's case, something Balaji Srinivasan likes to say is that proof of work is Bitcoin's, what is it? It's the alternative to the military-industrial complex, because it's the defense budget of this decentralized global currency, because a lot of the dollar's predominance around the world is enforced by the power of the US military and the wars that we fight to install new leaders in other countries who will use the dollar as reserve and things like that. And so when we're talking about the energy expenditure of a proof of work cryptocurrency or something like that, we have to keep in mind what it's replacing, and is it worth that expenditure to get that benefit? And I think, however much energy it's spending, it's certainly a tiny fraction of the energy and the cost and the violence that the military industrial complex does and causes around the world. So it's kind of a no-brainer decision, even if it were 100 times, less energy efficient than it currently is.
Yeah, I love that argument as well. I think even if you didn't want to get into the military industrial complex, and maybe some people don't believe that that's what backs the dollar, or they, one other thing that backs the dollar is the Saudis accepting oil payments in the dollar. That's kind of another thing that's backing it. But even if you don't want to get into that nuance, you could just say, how much energy is used to keep the banks in the United States open, right, and the air conditioning and the electricity and
the cars commuting there every day.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly right.
If you just wanted to simplify it to that, I think that also is a compelling case. And another compelling case you kind of touched on is that a lot of the energy being used to mine Bitcoin was otherwise trapped energy that was going to go to waste, because it's very difficult. I'm not sure many people understand this, but it's very difficult to move energy. You might have a hydroelectric system set up on a waterfall somewhere, but I think it's only like 500 miles that you can reasonably move the electricity, the energy that you produced, before it starts to deteriorate. And so a lot of the Bitcoin mining energy is otherwise trapped energy that now has a financial incentive, which allows for all of that energy production and investment to happen in the first place. So, and not to mention all the things that it does to stabilize the grid, which again is really good for everyone's energy usage. Any last thoughts on kind of proof of work, Bitcoin energy usage there before we move on?
Well, I wanted to mention that this topic is a great example of the difference between common knowledge and the world's best knowledge. The things that we're
Definitely.
talking about here are not difficult to understand and pretty much universally understood within the crypto industry. And yet, somehow professional journalists, after several years, almost more than a decade now, failed to either grasp these things or failed to be allowed to publish and publicize them. And so like the fundamental complaint about centralized institutions is not that they're not experts, not that they're not professionals, but that they're not honest. And if you're an average person trying to answer the question, well, is Bitcoin good or bad? If you're listening to media corporations, you're listening to people who are not actually interested in providing you the best information on that topic. They have access to it. It's right here. Everyone is trying to tell you, but they are deliberately obscuring the best information from someone who's just innocently trying to make their way around the world and navigate this new thing. And so that's one of the main reasons that we want to replace the centralized credibility systems with a decentralized one, so that at least the inquiries that the public have can be pursued at the level of honesty that the public can tolerate, not the level of honesty that media institutions will allow.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us your kind of hopes and expectations for this next week or two. Ideamarket.io is launching what sounds like just an updated version of the platform. What are you hoping to achieve with this? What are kind of your goals over the next couple of years?
Sure. So what we're hoping to achieve in the next couple of weeks is to establish some of the basic use cases. For example, one that has caught my attention lately is decentralized science. There are all these DeSci DAOs, as they're known, that collect independent scientific research from like people's Fitbits and stuff, and generates studies based on correlated statistics so that we can see interactions with things and do new medical research and discover drugs and things like that without going through typical scientific study channels that require a lot of money and institutional approval. And DeSci has the capacity in this way to make a lot of important breakthroughs, but they don't have the institutional connections that they would need to raise money and develop a drug, or to affect public policy, or to affect public conversation. And that's a perfect use case for Ideamarket, because this is a group of people who are doing really useful knowledge work and have no way of including it, making sure it's included in an appropriate way in the public conversation. So as a decentralized credibility protocol, I'm aiming to connect with DeFi DAOs to make their most important findings credible, getting people to rate them, particularly people with a lot of status, so that you can see this list of accumulated people who have all said, hey, I'm 92% sure that this is worth looking into. And that will not only help them get the institutional attention that they need to raise money and make all these bigger steps, but also affect the public belief at the rate of our ability to discover things, instead of at the rate of institutions' willingness to disclose things.
Very cool. So before we get into the last two questions that I ask every guest that comes on the pod, go ahead and give listeners a few places that they can go. Obviously, we've got ideamarket.io, but anywhere else you'd like to send them, maybe your personal Twitter handle?
Yeah, my personal Twitter handle is HarmonyLion1. Harmony like musical, Harmony Lion like the big cat, HarmonyLion1. And I also write a daily newsletter on epistemology at mikeelias.substack.com.
Great. And I'll include those in the show notes. So last two questions for you here, Mike. The first one, we've definitely already kind of gotten your opinion on, but I usually ask, what is your thoughts on Bitcoin? Are you a believer or not? So maybe since we kind of already established that to some degree you're a believer, maybe you can tell us just how much of a believer, how disruptive you think this will be 10 years from now. Are we going to be looking, at Bitcoin in a totally different way a decade or two from now? How important and big and foundational and disruptive is this going to end up being?
The more I learn about Bitcoin and the more I think about Bitcoin, the more completely beautiful and impressive it is. And it started out in this way where, only a few nerds who have already been working on this problem were interested in it, and they tried it and it was cool. And then it was successful enough that people who wanted to buy drugs on the internet started using it. All right, hey, this is a thing you can buy drugs with. And as it's taking over the world and people are taking deeper and longer gazes into it, like Robert Breedlove, people are discovering philosophical subtleties in it that are just incredibly beautiful and elegant and move me. And so I have a special kind of appreciation for Bitcoin for the philosophical depth that it achieves, because it's not an essay, it's not a philosophy paper, it's a thing that operates in the world according to all these, it's a philosophical argument almost incarnate.
Yeah.
And I love that. And that is the kind of approach that inspired Ideamarket as well. Like we are a philosophy experiment company. We are building philosophies that go out into the world and proselytize themselves and bake themselves into society without anyone having to understand. You can quote unquote use Ideamarket to buy drugs. But my hope is that if Ideamarket succeeds, it becomes this Bitcoin-like thing that unfolds and people go, oh, wow, they were really trying to make a point. And there's some beauty and depth and thought behind this. It's not just another social network.
Very well said. And I couldn't agree more. Some days Bitcoin feels like poetry. Some days it's technology. Some days it's the most disruptive financial instrument ever. Some days it's like hope and a potential savior on the horizon. So I agree. I think you put that beautifully. So my last question for you here, Mike, is: are we living in a simulation?
I think there are two ways to interpret that question. One is we're living in a simulation, therefore nothing matters. And I think this is the more common interpretation of it. It seems to be, in the public discourse around are we living in a simulation, the kind of undercurrent is like, therefore morality is not real, therefore you can do whatever you want and upload your brain to the cloud and alter your life in whatever way you can imagine. It's just all perfectly fine and doesn't do anybody any harm. And nothing matters. It's a very nihilistic, atheistic, materialistic kind of discourse around that. The other way of interpreting it, which I basically never hear, is that it's a simulation because what matters is not the content of this world. It's the way we relate to it. It's the way we live and what's in our hearts. And that would absolutely make sense. I'm a recent Christian. I'm born Jewish and I'm still Jewish, but a recent Christian. And the idea of King Solomon, that there's nothing new under the sun. He experienced all the riches and all the concubines and all the glory of various kinds and said, you know what, this isn't really the stuff that matters. And I think we can interpret the simulation argument that way too, that it may be that this world is not a thing that matters, but there is definitely something about our lives that matters. It's just, it can't be found in our material circumstances.
Yeah, and that's where I tend to go with it too, as your second example there, that regardless of whether or not it is a simulation, all the same things matter: relationships, life with meaning, purpose, love, joy, new experiences, all those things, whatever, like you said, the content or the medium or the structure is of our reality, it does not belittle the experience. But if I can try to pin you down though, because you gave a couple so you gave a couple examples there of like, if it's a simulation, XYZ, but are you saying, just practically, are you thinking that this is a base reality, this is all natural phenomenon, or do you think that we might be in a digitally created simulation?
I think our metaphors for reality evolve at the pace of our technology. Like when the clock was invented, all the philosophers were like, oh, the universe is like a big clock. And now we've invented simulations. We're all like, oh, the universe is like a big simulation.
Now, or a big metaverse now, yeah.
Right, yeah, big metaverse now. So a big VR, thing. So I don't think we should put incredible, weight on metaphors that are technological. I think it's interesting to understand the world in new and deeper ways, but the moral dimension of life shall not be ignored. It's that's where the meaning and importance is to be found.
Beautiful. Well, we'll end it there. Mike, thank you so much. Again, this is Mike Elias. He is the founder of Ideamarket.io. All of the links that he mentioned, places to follow their work, and hopefully their upcoming update here right after I get this episode out will be coming soon. So check that out. Mike, thanks again for coming on, and hope to continue the conversation on your podcast or mine over the coming months and years.
Great pleasure, man. I would enjoy that too. Looking forward to following your success.
Thank you, brother.